Hi, good evening everybody. This is InDesign 1 and this is the last webcast of week 5. It's webcast 6. This is a live lecture and I'm just going to try to tie up a few loose ends in this webcast tonight. I'm going to go back and mention a couple more things about color and PDF. So I'm just calling it the color and PDF extras. Next week we're going to start on frames, and actually we're going to be going through frames for the next couple of weeks. There are so many things to learn about it and really exciting, fun design elements we're going to be able to introduce once we get into more detail with frames. I want to revisit the PDF webcast for a moment because I was giving you all kinds of details, and after it was over I realized I never pressed the export button at the very end. So I would like to include completing that little task as well as going into one more little extra, which is creating a grayscale version of your file. It used to be that in order to create a grayscale version of an InDesign file, you had to first convert it to PDF, and then inside of Acrobat you would use a profile to export it to, and then you would get your grayscale. But starting with CS6, this is brand new, we can now export during the PDF creation process. We can export that color InDesign file to a grayscale PDF. And so this will kind of take care of two things at once as I talk about finalizing that process by clicking the button, and also if anyone's interested in creating a grayscale. So I'm going to move back to our demo file, and I'm going to go back to these pages that you guys have seen several times. So I'm going to focus basically on this spread, which has the magenta, which was built off of this flower, which we're going to talk about later tonight. How do we get color from photos that we've included, which I think is kind of fun and exciting. And then I'm going to also focus on this spread. So instead of converting this entire InDesign file to PDF, I'm just going to export these two spreads, which will be a partial PDF, but I'm going to convert it to grayscale. So I notice in my Pages panel that I'm starting at page 24. So what I would like to export is page 24, 25, 26, and 27. So just those 4 pages so that I can see what this would look like in grayscale. And as we know, I could go directly to my Adobe PDF presets, but none of these are going to convert my InDesign file to grayscale, though the process is going to be the same, and that's why I can do both of these things in one step here. So instead, I'm going to choose the export command because that is going to allow me to make some changes in the part of the export attributes that will give me this grayscale. And I'm just going to call this grayscale test. You can see I've already made a couple here, which I'll show you in just a little bit. And as we learned in our previous webcast, we have several panes here that we can go through. And in this case, I only want, as I said, 24, 25, 26, and 27. So I'm going to put in the range of 24 to 27. I want the pages and not the spreads. I still want all of these things that I talked about before. View PDF after exporting, optimize for fast web view, create tagged PDF. And I'm okay with the compression. I'm going to go ahead and leave that as high quality print. Though if I was sending this to a commercial printer, remember that I would probably use PDFX1A, or it's more prevalent in Europe to use PDFX3. 4 is actually, as I mentioned in the webcast, is a more powerful preset, but it's not adopted by everyone. So again, I repeat, please talk to your printer before creating the PDF that you're going to send to them. So for now, let's just stick to the high quality print. And the reason modified is added is, remember, we cannot make changes to a preset that has square brackets around it. The moment I make a change to one of these panes, it's going to add the word modified. And it's trying to prompt me to save this under another name, which at any time I can do by clicking in this bottom left-hand corner, this Save Preset. All right, we've gone through most of these, but this is the one that is going to allow me to change this to a grayscale PDF. Instead of no color conversion, I'm going to change this to convert to destination. So what that means is it's going to convert the color information to the destination profile I choose. And it's defaulting to the US web coded swap, which is really anytime you want to convert your RGB images to a CMYK, this is going to be the default that InDesign is hoping will solve your expectations or create your expectations. But if anyone has listened to David Blattner's talks on this with lynda.com, he suggests two other profiles. For coded stock, he suggests using, if I can get up here, where is that? Coded coded graphically. So where is my coded graphically here? And I don't see it, and I may just not be seeing it because this thing is just, oh, here it is, sorry. This thing is so huge on my screen so that it comes across at a decent size for yours. But this is it right here, coded GRACOL. He also suggests that for uncoded, this would be for something that does not have a shiny finish or does not have a nice smooth matte finish to it, that you use the uncoded Agra. And I'm not sure if that's how they pronounce it. But anyway, you might just think about those and always, again, always ask your commercial printer if they're happy with those particular profiles. But for me, I'm not interested in a color profile. I'm interested in something that's going to convert my InDesign file to a grayscale. So I'm going to go all the way down here to the bottom. And anywhere that you see dot gain 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30, these are the profiles that are going to convert your InDesign file. And it doesn't do anything to the source InDesign file. It's going to convert the colors as it turns it into a PDF to a grayscale. I don't want to give anyone the impression that you're going to be making any modifications whatsoever to your InDesign file, because remember, that's one of the reasons we like exporting to PDF, because we can use our source file, keep it the way it is, and yet make all of these changes to the conversion settings. Now, which one of these do you choose? Sorry. That's a really great question. I usually use either 15 or 20. 15 is what is used by default inside of Acrobat when we are converting color PDFs to grayscale PDFs. So let's just go ahead and choose 15%. And what I need to do now is do what I didn't do in the webcast of creating PDF files, is click the Export button. Let me do that. And do you see this little, I'll show you in a minute. I'll go back and show you this. It's going to happen really quickly. All right. So here are those 4 pages. Let me see if I can get that flower a little bit bigger here. Oh, and this is just lovely. I'm going to have to, the resolution of this thing has popped my application window out, so let me see if I can resize it. So hang on, it's going to reflow a couple times. Just bear with me while I get this to a size that looks halfway decent, and then I'll let it refresh. There we go. Hopefully that's all refreshed on your screens. So this is the That flower, remember, was the magenta flower, and now we're getting this really beautiful detail in grayscale. And if I go further down here, here we have our cute little penguin. You can see the detail is really nice. If you look at the fur on this little guy's belly, right in here, you can see that this really is a nice grayscale. It hasn't been flattened out in detail. So this is a great way to get a grayscale out of something. And because I clicked on the option that I wanted to view my PDF after creating it, it comes up immediately in view. And I can now say, all right, I don't know where it would have saved it. Sometimes it saved it in the file, the same place that the originating or the source file was sitting, but that's not always the case, depending on some of the defaults in your machine. So this gives me a chance to go to my File menu, choose Save As, and then I can dictate where I want this file to go. And I want it to go into this particular directory. So I can click Save. All right. Now I want to move down to this spread, and I want to talk a little bit about colors here. I want to show you a couple of more things that we weren't able to cover. We talked in a previous webcast about creating colors, creating swatches, and I talked about the fact that if you create a color using the color panel, you are going to create unnamed colors. That's one of the terms that are used for this. Okay, you guys, I also am going to take just a moment right here. I just have so many people joining the webcast. I want to be sure that I get people's names, because sometimes you guys check out before I have a chance to, at the end of class, before I have to get a chance to write everybody's name down. So hang on just for a second. All right, thank you. So we talked about the fact that we can use this little rainbow ramp down here. If I hold down my Shift key and I click on this ramp, it changes from each of the color modes. So there's, you know, RGB, CMYK, LED. And if I'm looking at a particular swatch, which I'm going to do real quickly here, I'm going to fill this with a color. And let me take that stroke off, just because I think it'll be clearer to see if it only has a fill and it doesn't have a stroke. So everybody can see there's the fill and the stroke has the red slash through, indicating that there is no stroke on that. I go back to my color box, and if I'm looking at a swatch color, it lets me see as part of that switching between color modes, one of these is going to be a tint ramp. So I could take this little slider and drag it down, and notice that my color gets lighter. It's not changing colors. This is, and it's not transparent. There's a big difference between making something transparent and just using a tint of it. And we're going to get more into transparency later on in the semester, but for right now I just want people to realize that just because I'm making this lighter doesn't mean it's not going to still block out. Hang on, let me just bring this in front. It's not going to block out what is behind it. If this was transparent, it would also look lighter, but I would be able to see the words gradient coming through this circle. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that at its full 100% value, its deepest color. That's, if I click over here in this corner, that's 100%. This is white. And then anywhere along here, notice that I get a number that is equating to where I'm clicking in this ramp. Halfway, I've gotten 52%. All right. I talked about the fact that you can add unnamed colors by either right-clicking or going to the color panel, and you can add to swatches. But that's going to add these one at a time. There are several different opinions about when you should add your swatches. It's kind of interesting. Some people who are designing just create their colors on the fly. And because they're creating them on the fly, sometimes they forget to add them to their swatches panel. And we talked about all the things that can go wrong if you don't eventually, at some point during the project, add these colors to your swatches panel, where they can be saved, where they can be shared, filtered, all kinds of things like that. But as you are adding these colors on the fly, and you get to the end of your kind of design, you've been spending 3 hours designing something, you think to yourself, oh man, did I add all of the colors to my swatches panel? Well, one of the commands you can use in the swatches panel is add unnamed colors. And it goes out into the file, and any color that it sees applied to something that is not currently in the swatches panel, it will go out and add a name so that it will be listed here. So I did want to go, and I wanted to talk just a moment about that, because I know some people are going to add colors in that way. Other people are going to come up with a very strict color scheme that they're going to need to follow. In that case, you're going to load your swatches ahead of time, and those are the only colors you're going to use in your project. This one way is not right and one way is not necessarily wrong. It really has to do with your workflow. All right. Another thing I wanted to talk about for just a moment about color is first letting you know that text can have color added both using the type tool, which is what we talked about before, and I can now go to my swatches and I can fill this with, let's say, purple, and I'm going to add a stroke of, let's say, yellow. Let me just increase the stroke because I don't think that's coming through on the webcast. Okay? Now I'm going to remove that stroke, and I want to go up here because this is the little icons that let me do the same things that I'm doing over here in my panes or my panels. This is my stroke, this is my fill. I'm going to hold this down and I'm going to choose none. And now that stroke is gone. By the way, another little shortcut here. If you choose, let's say that I want a different fill, and I choose this icon to help me pick something, by default it's going to go to my swatches panel. But there's a little shortcut that lets you go directly to your color panel if you'd like. You can hold down the Shift key, and now notice instead of getting the swatches panel, I get the color panel. So it just gives you a little bit more freedom when you're using the control panel. And as I said, this control panel is your best friend. This is the most powerful panel up there. Now because my resolution has been lowered, I am not seeing all of the icons that I normally see going across the top because it can only fill up what there's room to fill up. And one of the things that we did not talk about when we were talking about the interface is that there's a command on the control panel menu. Remember, every panel has a menu, and it's called Customize. So if I can't see a particular panel option that I want, I can go through here and I can delete some of the options that are showing up, and it will tend to squeeze then those other things that I really want. For instance, I'd really like to see Quick Apply, but there's no room for it up here. So maybe I would go out and say I don't want my alignment tools, or I don't really need my underline, skew, vertical scale, something like that. Now in this case I really would like those, and in my real world I don't use this level of resolution. my monitors at a much higher resolution, so I fit about twice as much in this control panel as is currently being viewed. But some of you may be working on a laptop that might have a lower resolution, or you want to lower the resolution so that the items on the laptop or even your regular tower workstation is bigger. I see this all the time when I go into companies. A particular employee will lower the resolution of their monitor so that everything's bigger. Because these days, the resolutions that are coming on the new laptops is so high. You know, I've increased my readers, my glasses, several times so that I can see it, because I really want all of those things to be able to show up. I want all that real estate, but at the same time I can't read it because it's too small. All right. So we went over highlighting text with the type tool and applying a color. But there is another way to apply color to text by using the selection tool. And sometimes I like this when I'm trying to decide what color is going to look best. I select the frame that's containing the text, and I go to my swatches, and I notice there are two icons side by side. One is just my standard fill icon, and one is a capital T, which right there is giving me a clue that this must have to do with colorizing text, and it does. If I click on the T and I change it to red, or I change it to blue, notice that instead of filling the frame with color, it's filling the text. Now let me go back to this other icon, the one sitting to the left of it. And let me now click on that red, and notice that the frame filled rather than the text. So if you don't want to select your text, you want everything in the frame to be the same text color. Let me get rid of this really quick. Then click the T, and you can make those changes. But I'm sure at this point you can guess what the disadvantage might be. If I only wanted one letter of this word to be another color, I wouldn't be able to do it using this method, because everything in this text frame is going to change. It's going to be filled or stroked with the color that I choose for my swatches panel or my color panel. I can even stroke this. Again, I have the capital T selected. I'm going to use yellow, and I'm sure you guys can see, well actually maybe that's not the best color. I can stroke that. All right. Another item that is really fun, and I didn't go over this when we were talking about colorizing. I'm hoping that you guys have had some time to practice some of this stuff so that some of this new information doesn't seem quite so overwhelming. There are times where I'm working on a project and I really want a color to be used in my text that is part of a photograph. I want to bring that into my design. And let me see if I can bring one of these. Well, I can just go ahead and use this penguin spread. That's fine. That's what I was planning on doing anyway. Often if we try to come up with a color, it ends up being close but not exactly the color of something that's in a photo. And so what ends up happening is the eye picks that up, and it really bothers you. So I want to show you how you can pull a color directly out of a photo. Sorry, I was just looking at your guys' questions. I'm going to get to those. I want to make sure everybody knows I am going to address those. Are those saved swatches unnamed document-oriented? Document-oriented. What does that mean? Only saved for the document open. Yes, that is exactly right. When you are creating these swatches, these are only in this document. In fact, I have another little booklet right here that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. And notice that, well actually I imported that. But let me go into my webcast. You see how limited the color selection is here. The reason this brand new booklet that I just created a couple hours ago has all of these swatches is because I went into my swatches panel and I chose load swatches. So this is how I can share color amongst different InDesign files. And let me just show you that really quickly, since this was a question that was asked. I'm just going to create a blank unnamed document. So here's my untitled. Remember, because it defaulted to a print InDesign file, it's giving me just my CMYK colors, and it looks like kind of a reflex blue here. So I'm not starting out with too much. But if I go to my Swatches panel menu and choose Load Swatches, I can choose any InDesign file that I can access from my system. So if this is on a server, that'll work, or on my hard drive, or on a second hard drive. I work with hard drives that are attached to my computer all the time. And anyway, let me just go into the demo file, which has a plethora of swatches. And notice now all the swatches that were in that file are now in this unnamed, untitled file. All right. So let me get back to this just for a moment. Okay. So let's say that I wanted these titles to match the dark purple color here in this penguin's mouth. Okay? We have a tool over here called the eyedropper, which allows us to pull color from imported photographs. When I found out I could do this, and this has been in InDesign for a really long time, I just went nuts. I absolutely loved it for different things I was, lecture invitations I was doing, flyers I was doing. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to select, there's a couple different ways we can do this, and I'm going to show you both ways. I'm going to select this title, the straw, the coal, and the bean. And then I'm going to click on my eyedropper. And I want to zoom in here because the closer I get, I can see that there are individual pixels. And if I don't click on just the right one that I want, I might not get the color that I really thought I was seeing in this collection of pixels. So I really want this darker, more pinky color. So I'm going to click right here. Now when I click, I want everyone to pay attention to this eyedropper. Right now it's leaning to the right and it's empty. But if I click, it flips to the other side and it fills up. So it's telling me that it's now filled up with this particular color. And if I zoom out, this is what it was doing today to me. I had the fill in front, the stroke in front instead of the fill. Let me just undo that real quickly. Bring the fill forward. I'm going to clear my eyedropper, do this one more time. Go back to my type tool because I don't want to click on anything else or I will spread that. And you can see that, wow, that came out really black. Hang on. Let's try that again. Obviously I clicked on something that wasn't. Let me wait for this to refresh. Let's try this again. Wow, that is really weird. You guys, I am sorry. I've only done this 50 times tonight. And I think it's because I changed a setting in here. So let me show you something else. Let's see if we can fix this. Great troubleshooting experience here. I'm going to double click on my eyedropper. And double clicking on a tool usually brings up its options. So I get my eyedropper options. And earlier tonight I was a little frustrated because it was filling and stroking. And I just want to see if everything is on here. Okay, hang on. And I know I'm flipping through these really quickly. That is really bizarre that this is not working. I'm just going to use a frame. I often will grab a frame if I'm interested in trying to troubleshoot something. So let me just quickly see what's going on with this little guy. Okay, no problem with that. Came over just fine. Maybe this color is just too dark. Maybe it is actually picking it up, but it just looks black. So let me go with a lighter color after all of that. Let me grab something from his tongue. There we go. Maybe it was, and it was too dark and I couldn't see it. But anyway, so there's the text. A lot longer than I expected this to take. I'm sorry, you guys. And of course, that's exactly how I got this blue. And in earlier webcasts where we had the caves, all of the brown, that's exactly how I was getting the color for all of those titles. So try this out. It's really fun to be able to pull color for anything that you're trying to decorate the page with. All right. Let's talk a moment about gradients, because we didn't talk about those, which is why I have this selected. I'm going to give this a fill of none, and maybe I'll do a stroke of black real quickly. Just so that we can see it. And that stroke is way too dark. Okay. So if anyone has ever worked with a gradient before, you know that a gradient is where one color blends into another color. So we call it vignettes, blending, all kinds of terms that describe a gradient. But a gradient is the word we use when we are talking about the swatch color that we're using. And we can create a gradient from our swatches panel very simply by just choosing the swatches panel menu and then choosing New Gradient Swatch. And because I worked with a blue swatch earlier, that's what it's defaulting to. But normally what you will get is a white to a black gradient swatch. And there are often suggestions by people who are teaching others about gradients, or that they're even trying to use them in their design as they're getting used to it, to first select an object or create an object that you can apply a gradient to so that you can see what's going on. So I'm just going to call this my gradient. And I can name that up here in my swatch name. I have a choice between a linear and a radial. We will get into what the differences between those are. And we'll get into these stop colors in just a moment. But for now, I just want to create an object that we can use here as our sample. So I'm sure it's very apparent now. You guys can see that this goes from a white to a black color. And then there's all these blending steps. Now because you are looking at this over the web and the resolution is so low, it doesn't look quite as bad on the monitor that I'm working on, but on my second monitor, I can see that there are vertical stripes going on. And that's because the gradations are not at a high enough resolution in order to make that really nice, smooth progression that we would like. So that's a lesson learned. If you're not going to print something at a high enough resolution, or you're going to use it on the web and you can't get the resolution that you need, a gradient's probably not a good idea for you. So when you print with gradients, you'll want to talk to your printer and just ask what's the resolution they need, and if their equipment is going to be fine with printing gradients. And in most cases you're not going to have a problem, but it's always a good thing to ask, because years ago this was something that caused a lot of problems with printers. All right, so let's go in and change this slightly. Let's make this look a little different, and I can do that by double clicking on the swatch that is in use, which is right here, it's highlighted, or I can go in and just choose swatch options by either right clicking or going to my swatches panel menu and choosing that command. And here, let's see if I can move this around a little bit. Let's just see here. Hang on, let me move this circle over just slightly so we can see it and see our options. Okay. So this is a linear. It goes from left to right. I can also change its angle. We'll do that in just a few moments. But it's comprised of colors that you dictate on this gradient ramp. And the gradient ramp has two gradient stops right now. It has a white stop and it has a black stop. I can change that color, as you saw me do to get it to white to black, by just clicking on the stop right on that little square. And then I can choose how I want to get a color. I could choose to just go in and to get CMYK, and I could put in those values or drag those values if I wanted to. Or I can just go ahead and choose my swatches and then choose a particular swatch that I want for that ramp. Let me see if I can find something a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to choose click on the black one. And in this case, let's make that yellow. Get kind of a setting sun effect. The center diamond is kind of your halfway point, but you can change that so that more of the object will be filled with either the color from the left or from the right. And again, a picture's worth 1,000 words here. If I drag this to the right, watch that ramp. Do you see how it's becoming darker and redder? Because it's saying this is going to be the beginning of the red, and it's going to go to this midpoint. And I'm dragging that out. So the yellow is getting smaller, and the red is starting to take over more of that shape. Now let's drag it the other way. And remember, the reason I'm able to see this happening in real life on my screen is because I have the preview button turned on. If this is turned off, I don't see anything that's happening out here as I'm modifying it in here. In addition to two colors, I can add more color stops. So I can click down below here and say I want this one to be green, let's say. Something really ugly. I'm going to move that over a little bit. And you can see it's now going from the red to the green to the yellow. I can add another color. And I'm adding these color stops by clicking right at the bottom of the ramp. So I position my cursor right here, click, and it just adds that color stop. And what happens if I've just overdone it? Okay, which obviously I've really overdone it here. I can get rid of a color stop by placing my cursor on the little square and then just dragging it down off the ramp, and it just disappears. Let's try that again. I'm going to place my cursor over this color stop and drag down, and it's gone. And I'd really like to get rid of this one too. I think that's pretty ugly. All right. Let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now I'm going to move over here, and I'm going to select this square, apply, say, a different gradient that I created earlier. But this time I'm going to change this from, actually I'm going to probably make a copy of this. So let me just I don't know if you guys saw what I did here, but I took the swatch and I just dragged it over the new swatch and it created a copy of it. So now I have a blue and white copy. I'm going to go into this one now and choose swatch options. And I'm just going to call this my newer gradient. And I'm going to make this one a little bit lighter. I really want that right-hand side to stand out a lot more. Not quite white, but I want it a lot lighter than it is right now. Okay, make sure that this is at 50%. If I want it exactly in the middle, I can click on the diamond and then type in 50 and press my tab key and it'll adjust that so that it's right in the center. All right, now let me move this over a little bit. I'm going to change this gradient from a linear to a radial. And I think that makes perfect sense why it's called a radial. My color is going from the center out instead of from one direction to the other. Now, even so, and I'm going to drag this over because I really like a little bit more of the depth of that color in the center. I have other options that will allow me to modify this. Let's say that I like the color the way it is. Let me darken this one just a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here and move down. And I'm going to apply this gradient again. And you can see that it took on the proportions of my object. Notice that it's long and skinny instead of the way it is above it in this square. And that's because a gradient takes on the proportions of the object that you are placing it in. So for example, I'm going to do the same thing in this long oval and compare that, let's see, let me use this one, to a linear. And you see for linear, it just goes from left to right. It really doesn't make any difference what the shape is. It's starting at a particular point, moving across until it can no longer fill anything else. And it's very similar to what I'm seeing above it, unlike what's going on here. So how can I change how these are being impacted by their gradient? We have a gradient panel, which allows you to do several things here. It allows you to reverse the gradient. So instead of going from the dark color to the light, it went from the light to the dark. I'm sure everybody can see that. You can also change the angle. You can change it from a radial to a linear. I can change the angle, so instead of it going from left to right, maybe I want that at 30%. And you can see that now the bottom left-hand corner is what is the light area as it's moving through. So this gradient panel is going to help me control in far greater detail how this gradient is going to look. But we also have a gradient tool. And this will do a similar thing, but it's going to be done manually by how I drag. So I'm going to click on this object, and instead of using this panel, I'm just going to drag from the top to the bottom, and notice that it changed the direction. Instead of the yellow, the red going from left to right, it's now going top to bottom. And if I want it at an angle, I could start over here, drag diagonally, and now notice the change in how that color is being distributed across that object. And you guys have to take the time to do this on your computers because I want everybody to see how really cool this is. It looks pretty bad on my second monitor. It's very chunky and it really is a nice effect. All right, I want you to be aware of something else too. If you start dragging out here and you continue through, The gradient is starting where I started to drag, and it's continuing to where I finished the drag. When I let go, I'm only going to see the middle portion because the rest of it is out of view. It's almost like it's being cropped off by the object. And another way to show you this is to do just the opposite. I'm going to drag inside of the oval. I hope you guys can see that. I'm starting well inside of the boundary, and I'm stopping well inside of the boundary. And I let go, and you can see that really the only part that's a gradient is just the part that that line was. This is solid red. This is solid yellow. But you can see this is the only part that has the gradient. I'm going to start back outside again. Whoop. And there I'm getting a much fuller one. Now let's talk about this one here. So I have a radial gradient, and I'm going to use the same tool. But instead of starting in the center, I'm going to start a little bit further out. Now with a radial gradient, I'm dictating where it's going to begin and where it's going to end. But you'll see how it reflects that just a little bit differently. So here's the center, and it's moved out. I almost look like I'm looking at a planet. I can go right from the center, drag out. I can drag it again, a short one in the center. And I can see that's where the center is, where I've started. So in order for this to be very small and in the actual center of the object, I'm going to click here, drag slightly out. And now you can see that the circle is centered, but it's only going as far as I dragged the tool. Let's get it back to the way we want it. From the center to the edge of the object, much better. All right. I was going to get into imposition tonight, but I think I'll wait for the next webcast, where I'm going to talk a little bit about, it's going to be an extension of talking about the print dialogue. I don't know if any of you ever have a little booklet that you're trying to print. Let's say that you have an 8.5 by 11 landscape and you want to fold it in half because your child is performing at a recital, or you're trying to do a little booklet for some sort of a reception, whatever it may be, and you want to have the page size half of an 8.5 by 11, so it would be 5.5 inches wide and 8.5 inches tall, and you would fold it over. And that's great when you have just one piece of paper, an 8.5 by 11. When you fold it, you open it, you see that there's two sides. You flip it over, there's another two sides. But what if you wanted an 8.5 by 11 inside of an 8.5 by 11? Now your pages are not going to match what's going on your screen. So, and a picture of this is what I brought up, where let's say you had 4 pages here. Pages 8 and 9 would sit across from each other. And if I was looking at the front, do you see how these pages are not in the order that they would be on the screen? So this is what I want to talk about. This is not going to match my pages panel of left, right, because these are going in consecutive order. So if anyone's interested in that, let me know, because I might push it out to later in the semester, but if anybody thinks that they'd like to use InDesign for some type of a project like that, then I'd rather talk about it sooner than later. All right, any questions before we close? And I really appreciate that you guys were here on Valentine's Day. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But anyway, if there aren't any questions, then I will just sign off. All right, everybody, have a good rest of the night. Take care.